Welcome to the Innate Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Loren Sofia, functional fertility coach and owner of Innate Fertility, and I'm honored to guide you through each episode where we'll cover not just fertility, but how to rediscover the innate wisdom of your body, restore your connection with your physiology, bioenergetics, and metabolism, and get back in touch with Mother Nature and ancestral traditions. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Innate Wisdom Podcast. On today's show, I'm excited to invite the creator of the course Body Talk Basics, Megan Ziegenfus, to help me demystify puberty and how you as a mother can navigate conversations with your daughters about this very important stage of life. Megan and I talk about what's really being taught in public schools, why conversations like this have been so taboo, and the flip side, the benefits of having conversations about puberty with your daughter, the different changes girls can expect to experience during puberty, how they can support their bodies as these changes occur, precocious puberty, delayed puberty, and so much more. I hope you enjoy the show. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Megan. I'm so excited to have you. And welcome to the Innate Wisdom Podcast. I would love to start out with asking you what your story is and what led you to doing the work that you do today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. So my background is as a middle school teacher, and I didn't teach health. I taught history and English, but when you're with middle schoolers, body, like you're smelling the body odor. They're telling you about their cramps and, why they're not doing their work because they're not feeling good because, they've just been exercising and their cramps are horrible, all that kind of thing. So you're kind of just in this world of puberty and body changes, regardless of what subject you're teaching when you're in middle school. But kind of before that point, I was on a journey of learning about my own body as a woman, which really started, I would say, in college. I had period cramps. They weren't, anything, over the top or excruciating or, ending me up in an emergency room or anything like that. But still, they were annoying. And, I just thought they were kind of a normal part of a period. Mm-hmm. And I remember coming across someone saying, that periods weren't supposed to be painful. And I was like, what do you mean they're not supposed to be painful? And I think in the context of the post I had seen, or I can't even remember the blog post I'd come across or something, they were talking about raspberry leaf tea. And it was like this little light bulb went off of, oh, what you put in your body can affect your experience of your menstrual cycle, which to me now sounds like the most basic light bulb moment ever. Like, why did I not think of that before? But it just was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess there are things that I can do. So that kind of got me down the path of realizing, oh, little tweaks here and there really did make big changes when my period came around. And then a few years later, my husband and I were going to get married, and we started looking into contraceptive options. And of course, all the options that I saw immediately, the pill, the IUD, those kinds of things were just immediate kind of no's for me. I'd had way too many friends who'd had horrible experiences on the pill. Learning about the process of putting an IUD in was just like, no, thank you. And I just was like, really? There are no better options that don't involve me really harming my body. And then I'm probably on a blog post, stumbled across someone talking about the fertility awareness method and this idea that, your body has a cycle with different signs that you can learn how to identify and make meaning out of. And again, it was one of those things where it was like, what? Our female bodies aren't just this mysterious, weird, kind of broken, kind of cursed, we're not maybe as mysterious as we are taught to believe, Mm-hmm. And so that kind of, again, led me down this female health rabbit hole and led me to be like, we need to be talking about this earlier. Like, as a 22-year-old woman, I shouldn't be just now learning about the 4 phases of my menstrual cycle and how amazing cervical fluid is and all that kind of stuff. you really need this stuff earlier. So then I, go and get my master's in teaching. And so we learned some about human development and sexuality and stuff like that in my master's program. But even in that, you kind of got a sense for how health is talked about in schools, which is very kind of sterile, scientific, here are the stages, and really it was missing the other things that had kind of brought female health alive to me, which was kind of the basic understanding that, our bodies are designed very intelligently, that it's also about, our mind-body connection, the importance of nourishing ourselves in a very broad sense of what nourishment looks like as well, food, but also just how we treat our bodies, how we think about our bodies. It was really missing all of that made female health feel exciting and empowering to me. And so then I, got into the middle school classroom and was teaching, history and English and all of that, and just watching the kind of lack of knowledge about the body kind of play out in front of me, and just, to the extent that I could see it as a middle school teacher. And so then when COVID hit, actually just a little bit before that, I thought I would really love to teach mom and daughter workshops or something about the basics of the cycle. And then COVID hit, and so many people started making online courses, and students became more familiar with that kind of education, being online. And so I thought, well, maybe actually I'll make an online course about puberty, and moms and daughters can take it together. And then it kind of relieved me of the burden of figuring out exactly what age, this is a course for 12-year-olds or something like that. Because I was also seeing as a middle school teacher, I had 12-year-olds who were telling me they were sexually active with their boyfriends, and then 12-year-olds that are like pretending to be a cat crawling around on the floor in the middle of my lesson. You know what I mean? So I'm just like, there are very different, stages of development and what different girls are ready for, and who, is in the best place to witness that and know what their daughter needs, their moms. And that was a missing piece of what I was seeing in the classroom as well. Like girls are learning this outside of the context of their moms, and it's kind of this missed opportunity for bonding between a mom and daughter. And so I thought, okay, well, perfect. If moms could kind of take this self-paced online class with their daughter, they could take, listen to whatever they're ready for and have this bonding experience that would really be kind of the gift that I wanted to offer the world. So anyway, that's what I did, and spent the next year. I ended up quitting my classroom teaching job and spending the next year just building out this curriculum and experience for moms and daughters to hopefully introduce them to concepts that were so life-giving to me at a much earlier age. So that's kind of my story.
Well, I think that's beautiful. And I think I have so many things I want to say, but I think that it's such a beautiful way to introduce this information and, have the maternal figure be the shepherd of it. I'm still, allowing them to kind of like shape what their daughter or maybe niece or, the steward?
Yeah.
No. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of right.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of that word and that relationship term, but I can't right now. But you kind of know what I mean, because maybe the mother, you don't have as great of a relationship with your mother, or
right.
You have found this young woman in your life, and you still want to give her this education. And I think that is beautiful to have that sort of maternal figure being able to deliver and sort of talk through this information, even if it's not mom.
Right.
And I think that perspective is really important too, because that way, I think parental sort of purveyorship is really important in terms of the information that kids receive and also absorb.
For sure.
But I also think it's beautiful how this came out of your own experience, because, I had a very similar experience as well, or it was different in terms of like, I didn't really understand that there was other options outside of birth control, and that the female cycle was not as mysterious, as you said, as it was supposedly, made up to be. And I was actually quite angry when I figured out that there were other ways other than, IUDs and birth control pills, things that actually really hurt my body. I did end up taking these things, and I did end up paying for them for a long time. And I felt super betrayed. And I felt like I wish I could have turned back the clock to, teach my younger self or learn about it. And I didn't understand why even I don't think my mother knew either.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really beautiful because also in that sense too, it's almost like an education for the mother as well. And so I think that that's amazing. And, you're really opening up new avenues that I think in general, more young women are more aware of this kind of thing and that there are other options and they're more decisive about what they want. But I think it's just so amazing to be able to just give them this thing that lays it all out for them. And I'm super, super proud of you that you're doing this work. I wish, there's also like a lot to be learned from your experiences. So I don't think I would have changed anything, but, I think it's absolutely beautiful. And I cannot wait to see all the young women that grow up empowered with this information.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Awesome. So tell me, as a middle school teacher, what did you see being taught to our daughters and why? And, I know part of the answer of this question, but I would love to hear your perspective, why you feel that there's a need to supplement their knowledge.
I mean, I think maybe it's a little bit about kind of what I was hinting at before, but I think it's taught in kind of this, at least this is what I was kind of hearing from my students and, talking with some of the other teachers when they're getting ready for, this unit and that kind of thing where, it's this kind of sterile presentation of the facts, kind of like what you'd expect in science class about, learning about other, animals or just like the natural world where it's kind of separate from like really an embodied experience. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, here are the facts. And I certainly remember that from my own schooling. It was a video that you watch and you might learn some of the practical things like this is a tampon and, here's where you put a tampon in, maybe if they got into that much detail, or here's how much blood you lose, that kind of thing. But it's really not anything about how you care for your body or even like celebrating how amazing it is that we have these cycles and that they can give us so much information. It's kind of just like, well, you're in 7th grade now, and in 7th grade we watched this video, or in 5th grade or whatever it is, and, girls, you're going to get a period, and this is what it is. And it's just, I feel like it's kind of missing even like this spark of like excitement or the sweetness of being able to share this is what's going to happen. And like we as women, we have like this gift that we're given of a menstrual cycle, and here's kind of how we steward it. And like one of the kind of things that I say throughout the course is like, you and your body are on the same team, which like the wording of that isn't great because I think we are our bodies in some ways, but we're not just our bodies. But that idea that like your body isn't out to get you, like it's not this period cramps or like periods happen to you. It's like that is your body doing its thing. And so how do we kind of bring a unification between our bodies and our minds and, I believe our spirits too, but, to experience this cycle in a more thoughtful way versus just like periods. Now here's pads. And, I guess it's kind of like, just kind of sterile. Here's the things you need to go buy to clean up your mess, that your body makes every month. And so, there wasn't any, like, I didn't hear any girls talk about, like, there was no excitement around it. It was just kind of like, I have to go through this thing. And then that was reflected in also their experiences of having periods for the most part that I could tell. It was just this like, can I borrow a pad? My period started, that kind of thing. Cause I would always have pads and stuff in my classroom. They knew they could ask if they needed it and stuff like that. So, which is very different than the feedback that I am getting from moms and from girls who fill out little feedback form for me of like, there is an excitement about their periods. You're like, oh, I had no idea that it was so cool, or like that it could be so empowering, maybe not using that exact language, but like one mom recently told me, because there's a mom share portion in each of the sections where moms get to kind of share their own experience about that part of growing up. And so I had moms share about their first periods and what they remember and kind of their emotions surrounding it. And the mom had shared with me that she was telling her daughter about how embarrassed she was. She didn't know what was going on. And that was kind of this like kind of shameful experience for her. And then I have girls later on reflect on like how they're feeling about periods. And she said she saw that her daughter had written that she was excited. And, she'd spelled it like EXSIDED or something like that, that she was excited for her period to start, and her mom was just like, that was so amazing to see that like here her daughter was going to have a very different experience than her. And so I think, again, that kind of that spark, which is interesting because it's all, puberty in many ways it's all about fertility, which is your focus too. But fertility is not just this like having babies, or it's not just like this scientific cycle. Like it's this life energy, it's like creativity, like all of these. It's a very broad, or I think it should be kind of considered in a more broad way. And so I want to be able to be a part of sparking that excitement for, life and cycles and all of that earlier, which I have not seen come out of the school system at all. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, I love that. And I agree. There's so much depersonalization and detachment. And I think that the fact that that starts so early and, even earlier, but, you will see that as women get older and then they start to deal with cycle issues that really have repercussions when they're trying to get pregnant. And then it's this whole battle of trying to merge their cycle, the thought of this thing that's supposed to be like, it's my cycle. What does it have to do with my health or anything like that?
Yes.
And the stuff that I'm doing every day does not impact this thing that's happening to me. But in reality, it's all part of the same experience. And so I think that that's really beautiful because you're already bringing that in-tuneness and the bodily awareness, because that is so hard to create and build. And it can really provide so much advantage, not just in terms of health and wellness, but also mental well-being too, as this young woman grows. And so I think that that is amazing.
Yeah.
So on that note too, because you mentioned this sort of feeling of embarrassment, and, I think many parents, at least from my parents' generation, were on the more avoidant side of the topic of like, sex ed and period health.
Yeah.
And my mom was kind of like, so this is what's going to happen, but that's it. And she was really excited when I got my period. But everyone else in, my friend circle was like, oh, yeah, this sucks. Like,
right.
So it was like a really strange dichotomy of emotions. Like my grandmother and my mother were super excited and just like, oh, and then my friends were just like, oh, this sucks. And this is such a burden. But, regardless, there was still not a lot of information that came out of the excited half of my experience. And I've pretty much heard the same from all my peers. And that excitement kind of also made the embarrassment a little worse too. So why do you think that is? And, what could be some of the repercussions of not sharing this information with young women and daughters?
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons. I think for some moms, and I got this when I was even just telling moms like, oh, I'm making this course. It was this kind of feeling of like, well, I don't even really know exactly what's going on with my cycle or even my period. So like when you see like you've had a period for a long time at this point of being a mom, but then when you think about like, okay, how to actually describe what is happening? I think for a lot of women, it's kind of like, what's kind of the order again? Or like, why exactly? Like you have this kind of, it's all very vague. And so when you start to think about actually explaining it, it's a little bit nerve-wracking because you realize even though you have a lot of experience with it in your body, you don't exactly know how to translate that to information to your daughter. So I think there's just the kind of lack of knowledge, which again just stems from like, their mom also didn't know. And their mom before them also didn't really know, depending on, I think that's probably the common experience. I'm sure there are exceptions. So I think kind of lack of knowledge. And then, also it's such a web of big topics that you stumble into, so it's like you have periods and then like just off to the side is like sex. And then like just off to the side, it's like you have relationships and just not just that, so we have all of these things that I think are a lot in themselves to talk about and figure out how you want to approach them. Or maybe you have had negative experiences with any of those or all of those. And so you're not wanting to maybe revisit that in yourself, or you're not wanting to unload that on your daughter. And so it's just much easier to kind of turn away and just hope your daughter, doesn't start her period till she's much older and maybe you thought about it, or, something like that. So yeah, there's that component, and being maybe nervous to open up a can of worms, or, your daughter's going to ask you something that you don't know how to answer then because you've introduced a certain topic. And so I can totally understand and empathize with why it's probably so much easier for moms not to go there, or just feel apprehensive about going there with any of the puberty or sex ed conversations. And I think there's also, have gotten a number of moms who, have reached out and said, oh, my daughter started her period, and maybe she's 10 or 11 or something like that. And maybe they started their periods when they were 13 or 14 or something like that. So to them, it's like, oh, it feels so young that their daughter started their period. And there's this kind of sense of like, oh my gosh, my child is now, like, she's already experiencing this more adult thing. And so I think it's also complex because it's very emotional for moms, I don't think starting your period makes you an adult, but it definitely is a part of your maturation process as a person or as a woman. And so there's just those emotional layers too of like, not wanting maybe your little girl to grow up, and in a period is such a sign of getting older. And so it's really a whole web of potentially uncomfortable feelings for moms. So, but I think the repercussions of that are, when we don't understand something, we almost always interpret it negatively. That's just kind of a fact of how our minds work. And so there are so many changes that happen during puberty. And if you aren't given any heads up or any explanation of like, oh yeah, no, that might seem weird, but that's actually totally normal, your mind will fill in often a negative interpretation of what that change is. So I can't tell you how many women have told me, I was convinced I had breast cancer when I got breast buds because, you have a hard little lump suddenly show up on your chest and you're like, I'm going to die, or you weren't told about periods. And then suddenly there's all of this like red stuff in your underwear and you're like, do I have something? Am I bleeding out? Am I going to die? Like all these things that, we kind of can jump really quickly to like they're really intense and scary. And unless you have a dynamic with your mom where you can go and share those things or those fears, you don't. And so then here you are, this, 8-year-old or 9-year-old or even 10 or 11-year-old who's just like walking around, being like, I think I'm dying, and like you don't know who to tell. So it's so sad that I think that's a relatively common experience for girls who don't know about the changes that their body's going through. So again, it's like as much as it is hard to go there in those conversations, like thinking about what can happen when girls don't know is also something that you have to contend with. And is that an experience that you want your daughter to go through? So
thank you for that. Yeah, it's such a vulnerable time where there's so much going on, and the addition of all these changes can really be so overwhelming. Totally. I guess on the flip side, what are some of the benefits of having these types of conversations, especially that you've seen come out of the mother and daughter relationships in your program?
Yeah. It's interesting. It was kind of cool thinking about like my experience as an English teacher. We talk about literacy a lot, and why is literacy so important? And one of the big reasons that literacy is so important is because it allows you to not be taken advantage of. It's like if you can't read, you are so vulnerable. You are vulnerable to being given a contract, having no idea what it says, and signing away your rights, your life, whatever it is. And so being able to be literate is such a ticket out of a number of really unfortunate scenarios that can happen to you. And so I think thinking about body literacy, it's exactly the same benefits that are playing out for you. If you don't know what is normal for your body, if you don't know what's not normal, and, for example, like really heavy periods or even period pain, and you just think that's just part of what it means to be a woman, because that's how many women talk, it's like, welcome to the girls, like, welcome to being a woman. Now it's like pain, that kind of thing. Like, that's kind of how, a number of women talk. And even I still see reels out all the time, about like just kind of talking about period pain or periods in a way that is maybe trying to lighten the mood, as far as like, look at what we all have to experience, but it's still not highlighting like, wait, that's not normal. It's not normal to be like taking a bottle of ibuprofen and like laying on the couch for the first 2 days of your cycle, all of those things. So even though that might be relatable, that's not normal. And so if you think that's just normal, that's what puts you on the track of accepting, I think, the more kind of conventional advice about what you should do, which is, I think how many women end up on something like hormonal birth control as a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old or something, because they don't know that what they're experiencing is a sign that their body is like, I need more support. So even like in my course, I talk about, I think we should rename PMS to please more support, because that's really what your body is asking for. It's not this like, oh, again, this is just part of being a woman, part of having a period. It's like your body is so wise and so intelligently designed. It has all these ways to get your attention. And so when we learn, oh, I should actually listen, like my body's crying for help, it's not trying to punish me, I think opens the door for like, oh, okay, I can work with my body here. What are some solutions? Rather than, what pill is going to shut this process down? Because I just don't want to experience it. And again, like no judgment for people who go in that route, because I think like I can see how you get there, if you don't have the information about what those things are going to do to your body, like, of course, again, no one wants to experience debilitating period pain. I think it's more so just about learning the things that pain could be communicating that allow you to, work with your body, I guess, rather than against it. I mean, I think the other part too is just the bonding that can happen when you have those kinds of conversations with your daughter. And that's just so powerful. I mean, that's really one of the main pieces of feedback that I get from moms, is just that the course helped them to start some of these conversations that they're wanting to have. And that, one of the most common pieces of, feedback I get is like, and we were so sad when it ended, and so like we wanted to keep having, so for some moms, they like, if they were watching the course on Monday nights together, they like decide to keep doing that, or they kind of keep having some sort of, they have like an easier way of connecting. And not that you need my course to connect with your daughter, but that's built into the core design of it, is that and I even say it in the course, like this will hopefully just be the start of many conversations that you continue to have together. And I think sometimes just having that third person, like that third point to kind of start things off, is really helpful. And I know for me, like, even if my mom had known more about the female body or whatever, I think there would have been some resistance in me as a preteen. Like, I had a hard time just like learning from my mom, or if my mom was just like, okay, we're going to sit down, we're going to have this conversation, I'm going to teach you all these things. It reveals a bunch of things about myself and personality that maybe I don't like, but I would have had kind of a hard time of just listening. It would have been the like, oh, mom, kind of thing. But when you're both watching something together and then turning and talking about it, like you're having this joint experience with your mom, and not this hearing my mom say these words that make, or, like uncomfortable, like that maybe we don't talk about in this way normally or something like that. And so I think that's part of the bonding too, is like you've both experienced something together, and maybe moms have learned in the process. So they're sharing like, oh, I didn't know that. And so it becomes this, thing that then you can even reference. I have a number of moms who will tell me their daughters are like, remember when Miss Megan said this, or whatever, which I love, where it becomes this kind of thing you can point back to. Like, remember this? Like, I thought of another question about blah, blah, blah. And it just, I think, becomes easier to talk, which is like, that's a lot of currency for those teen years and preteen years, just having that ability to talk about those things more easily.
My goodness, yes. I feel like what I've heard so many of my friends who have sort of like teenage children is that they tend to start to close up, and they get sad because they used to have this really open relationship and open line of communication. And now it's just like they're struggling emotionally with that just change. And I think that in itself, this program's ability to just like open that line of communication back up, especially when, your child's going through such a vulnerable time, is just such an amazing way to just kind of revitalize that relationship, but also support your daughter as she's going through this, rather than, kind of just having to deal with, oh, I guess that's how she is now.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But that's beautiful. I love everything that you said. And I think this is a good segue too, because there are so many changes that can come along with puberty, and many can feel so weird and so new. And I'm wondering if there are any changes that are often overlooked in puberty conversations, but that you think are important to make sure that your daughter knows about.
Yeah, for sure. I think, one is breast buds, for sure. Like remembering that like there'll be often like hard lumps, which again is kind of concerning. It's interesting. I think like breast cancer awareness is something that is talked about more. And even like I know around here, there's like billboards sometimes about, like discovering like hard lumps, like those kinds of things. And so I think in part because cancer is kind of more in the public eye, I'm wondering too if that's going to lead to even more girls being like, oh, what is this? I found a lump in my breast, and like those kinds of things. And so I think just communicating that like that is that's a normal stage of development. And also that breast buds don't always grow in at the same time. So it's also normal to have like one and not another for a couple of months. And yeah, and that's fine. And even like breasts might not be exactly the same size either, even when they're done developing. And so there's just so much variation of what is normal, which is something that I try to really teach in my class too. I think there's just so much insecurity about like, does this look right? And you don't have a way of knowing that for the most part. And so really communicating like, that there is a wide range of normal of what things can look like, but also having that communication is important of like, oh yeah, but still, like welcoming their questions and things like that. Because obviously there are things that aren't normal, but so breast buds would be another one, or would be one. Often first periods are brown. They're not red. So if girls are expecting blood, I don't think of brown when I think of blood, but that's why I think of red. And so I have heard from a number of friends, a number of women that they were convinced they had pooped their pants and didn't even realize they'd started their period, And so that can be helpful to address. And it's interesting too, just when you don't know much about something, like you just are also vulnerable to misunderstandings about things, or like wording. You can take wording in a really funny way. So I just have heard a whole spectrum of examples of like, oh, my mom said, you'd get your period once a month. And so I thought it was just like one day. So I wore a pad for one day, and then I didn't the next day because I thought like, oh, I got my once a month period, like that kind of thing. And so I think just trying to kind of think through all of those details of like, what does an experience of a period actually look like, or what can it look like, is helpful. And just kind of like playing out like, what are different ways that this could be taken, when you're thinking about how we talk about some of these changes. Another one is vaginal discharge. I know for some girls, like that's a really big thing where it's like, what is this? And, affirming again that is normal, and that often shows up, maybe 6 months before you begin your period, that sign that estrogen levels are rising in the body. And for some girls, like it is a really weird experience. I think I had almost forgot. I was glad that I had a number of friends bring that up to me when I was making the program. I started, just like polling all the women I knew, like, what do you wish you'd known about your body? And that was one that came up a lot that I had kind of forgotten about myself. But I think, once you start your cycle, like you're kind of used to these like slightly different sensations or things where you're just like, yeah, things flowing out of your vagina, you know what I mean? Where you're just like, okay, you have your period and you have different cervical, fluid levels during your cycle. But as a girl, that's very new to be like, what is in my underwear? And like, what was that? And why does it feel different when I wipe, or those kinds of things? So just remembering like, oh yeah, I have to kind of explain that this is part of a new experience, and that it's very normal. Like, so I know for some friends of mine, they just wanted to wear panty liners all the time because they felt like, oh, they were wet, and that was, that was bad, and all that kind of stuff. So discharge was one that I had almost kind of forgotten about, but could be kind of scary. Like, what is coming out of me? That being a totally new experience. I mean, there's so many more, but I think those are just three to start with that can hopefully avoid some nervousness and anxiety.
Those really hit home for me because they were 2 out of 3 I experienced as a young woman or a teenager, I should say. And actually, no, not even a teenager. When I was 12, that's when I got my period. It was brown, and it was Christmas. I remember that too.
That would be memorable.
Yep. That was a really wonderful gift. And no, really, it was just a little surprising. To be dealing with that excitement on Christmas.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, and then the cervical fluid was another one. I was always so confused about it. And yeah, I feel like definitely was not educated on what it meant. I thought I had an infection all the time.
Yes, right.
Like, I'm going to die. And that also led me back to a memory that I have of when I was sick as a child, and my lymph nodes were protruding a little bit. And that was like when I feel like cancer really started to get talked about in the media. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Oh no.
And so the next time we went to my pediatrician, I was like, am I dying? Can you check my neck? I have these bumps on my neck.
Oh,
like, oh, sweetie, those are your lymph nodes. They're just a little protruding because you were just sick. And so I totally can, what you're saying and the experiences that you're sharing are just so relatable to me. And I'm sure they are for many other women listening, but also for many of the teenagers and, children that are experiencing their periods for the first time too. So I love that you share about these things, because if I had known that these things were normal, I feel like I would have just had a little more ease.
Right? Totally. There's enough to be stressed about just in general that we can't really change, but we can learn more about our bodies.
Hey, it's Loren. I hope you're enjoying the conversation. If you're an adult woman looking to track your cycle and learn fertility awareness, don't forget that I have a fertility awareness masterclass where you can learn exactly how to track your cycle, including during scenarios like trying to conceive, coming off birth control, post-loss, irregular cycles, postpartum, and more. And if you're looking for ways to optimize your cycle to get pregnant, make sure to check out Conscious Conception, my pregnancy prep e-course where I not only teach you how to boost your egg quality, progesterone levels, and more, but the exact steps you need to take for whatever cycle abnormality or irregularity you might be dealing with, from long follicular phases to anovulation to amenorrhea to luteal phase defects and so much more. Visit innatefertility.org/get-pregnant to learn more. And if you're loving the episode, please make sure to leave a review. Now back to the show. The theme of what we've been talking about is that the female cycle is a marker for health, and it's not detached from your being. And you're trying to bring that together. But, I would love to hear from you if you have noticed anything that's super common that gets uncovered when mothers and daughters start having these conversations that maybe are normal or maybe not so normal, and then they can take proactive action on.
I haven't exactly heard, so like in testimonials or that kind of thing, like no one has shared with me things that have been necessarily avoided or something like that. But I think thinking about a few of the topics that I wanted to teach about in the course, because I'd heard so many women say that they wished they had avoided certain things or that they wished they had known would be, so I do talk about things like heavy periods, which I think are a very common experience that often gets overlooked. And I have had a number of people that I know in my own life who even, went to the ER or went to their doctor and said like, I'm bleeding this much. And it's kind of like, oh, well, you just have a heavier than normal period. And that's just kind of treated as normal. So I started to kind of, introduce ideas like that, that again, these are little messages our body is sending us that it needs some more support and isn't just another variation of normal. A big piece, which I kind of mentioned at the beginning, is that we have to fuel our bodies. We can't expect a car to run without gas. And so expecting to eat a bag of chips and then go to your soccer practice and do your thing like that, our bodies need more than that. And that our menstrual cycles don't run just on their own without any sort of fuel, that our hormones, like this whole system in our bodies, like all systems in our bodies needs fuel, and our fuel coming from good nourishment that we're putting into ourselves. And so I don't go into great detail about nourishment, but I do talk about even things like choosing where you can more balanced snacks. So we have like a little snack planner, and I have kind of like protein, carbs, and fat, and kind of talking about like how can you make a snack that has all of those things in it. And I certainly wouldn't refuse an apple or something, or not just eat an apple if someone gave me an apple and I was hungry. But where I have the choice, I might choose to eat that with some cheese or with some yogurt, or those kinds of things, because our body needs this whole kind of collection of nutrients to function. And so my hope is just by even just introducing those concepts, it kind of avoids that light bulb moment when you're much older of like, oh, I have been essentially starving myself for years. That's why that's a piece of the puzzle of why my period experience sucks, or like why I'm having all of these issues, or why I don't experience a period as regularly as I'm told is normal, or those kinds of things. So
yeah, that's awesome. I love that piece that you include about nutrition, because I remember around the time I got my period, my lunches consisted of not super often, but frequently enough, of like just French fries from the cafeteria and the zebra cakes. And that would be my lunch.
Right.
And I thought that was fine.
Exactly, because you're like, I'm eating food. Like, you just think food. You don't think like building blocks of nutrition or anything.
Things have definitely changed, but my gosh. And that plays such a huge role into how your period goes and how you feel overall and your skin health. There's so many girls breaking out like crazy, and boys too around that age. And it can just totally shift how you experience that phase of life. Just even that little nutritional shift can make such a huge difference.
For sure. Yeah.
I would love to hear what you're hearing from moms and daughters in your course on this topic. I've seen more and more in my practice that there are more and more extremes happening with girls in this country. There are a lot of them getting their cycles as early as like 7 or 8 years old, or 17 or 18, and they still haven't gotten their periods yet. And I'm just curious to know, a lot of what we've been talking about just now too plays a role, but if you have any sort of theories on why this is.
Yeah, I am. I'm feeling like I'm getting more and more messages about it, and whether or not like maybe their daughter's gotten their period at 7 or 8, maybe it's like they're getting breast buds or, body hair, some of those things that are evidence that the puberty process is starting pretty early. Yeah, it's such an interesting topic. And it's interesting that there is so much question around it. You know what I mean? It's not like something that you Google and it's like, yep, here's the answer. It's like people in a number of different fields are trying to figure out why exactly this is happening and proposing different theories and things like that. Obviously some of the theories are, that body weight plays a role, that, endocrine disruptors in our environment and our food plays a role. And I think those are compelling for sure. And I would guess a piece of the puzzle. One that is interesting to me that I've been looking into more recently is the role of leptin and melatonin, because both of them play a role in the, kind of like the puberty hormones, the gonadotropins, those kind of like the release of those. Also, like for melatonin, there's a link with when you have a dip in melatonin, more kisspeptin is released. And then that has a role in gonadotropin. So all that kind of stuff that isn't necessarily, there isn't strong evidence that that's starting the puberty process, but that's like a piece of all of these things. Like, why is the pituitary gland starting to, release these hormones and, all of that kind of thing. And what's interesting about both leptin and melatonin is they are like circadian rhythm controlled, and that thinking about light, or in like the case of melatonin, darkness, thinking about our world, our modern world, like that is a huge shift. We have so many shifts from, this centuries and centuries before us, but that, I mean, like artificial light and screens, all of that, and the use of them, even in the past few years compared to what it was in my childhood, like that's a huge shift. And there's really interesting research about how many more instances of early puberty were documented during COVID, like during kind of like, the COVID window and just after. And so I was reading an article talking about also like the use of screens and like lack of outdoor time in that window of time as well. And, blue light inhibits melatonin production. And then once kids start the puberty process too, there's all this interesting stuff with they become more sensitive to light in the evening. So, looking at a screen or being under artificial light is more inhibitory of melatonin than it is when you're an adult. And also then kind of the opposite of that they need more light in the morning to actually kind of wake up than adults do. So there's like this interesting circadian rhythm shift that happens when kids are in puberty. And so I'm really intrigued about maybe this kind of circadian rhythm component as well that I haven't heard talked about as much, but just feels like a piece of the larger puzzle and just our general health and fertility. But to me, I mean, those things just seem like they would have to play a role. And it's hard to me because everyone's bodies are so different. So that's also always mysterious when you're talking about anything. It's like, well, I have multiple kids and they didn't both go through early puberty, like that kind of thing. But it's always, our bodies are all built differently as far as what we're more resilient to or less resilient to and that kind of thing. But anyway, so I have more research and investigation into that topic, but moms are definitely concerned about it, and for good reason. But I'd love to hear some of your theories, or if you have any too.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's super fascinating. I actually have that as an asterisk in my to-do list for precocious puberty, the role of leptin and melatonin, because I forget where I first heard about the connection between that possibly being a trigger in screen time. I can't remember, but I've also heard that. I'm so glad you're already like researching. I do think it can absolutely play a role, and it makes sense because I've done extensive research on how that plays a role in just being able to get pregnant in general, and the circadian rhythm, the way it controls all the sex hormones and thyroid hormones, and how important it is to regulate your circadian rhythm for your fertility in general. So I can absolutely see why that could play a role in terms of puberty, and maybe bringing it on early or delaying it. I do think endocrine disruptors are a huge, component. And in that way, like blue light is an endocrine disruptor.
True. Yeah. All comes back.
Literally everything is like, exposure to more heavy metals, exposure to more chemicals in the water, like that. All those are all endocrine disruptors. The chemicals you put on your body, you spray on your skin. And so I think endocrine disruptors as a whole in general are probably the reason. I remember when I was 8 years old in dance school, there were two girls who were my friends, and one of them got her period at 8 years old. She already had blossomed at 8 years old.
Wow.
And there was another girl who, same thing, but she had really horrible periods that she'd have to actually go to the hospital because she'd lose so much blood. And so this has been going on for a long time, and I've seen it. And, back then I was like, that's really weird. I feel terrible for them. I'm glad it's not happening to me. But now that I'm older and have the more wherewithal and knowledge, I'm like, there definitely something, was going on, and that is not normal. And I feel like that would have been really scary for me as a child to go through. I do think also I've been looking more into pheromones and how they can play a role. And I think on the Andrew Huberman podcast, he talked about this, where it's interesting how pheromones can play a role because there was, I guess, a study done on girls who had exposure to a father's pheromones versus not. And the girls that did have exposure to their father's pheromones, and this is kind of what the authors kind of concluded, it was the pheromone exposure that resulted in this. But the girls who had a father figure around, biological father figure, they got their periods later than the precocious puberty group who didn't have a father figure around. And it was all having to do with the pheromone exposure of the male figures to these and the girls who didn't have a father figure but were exposed to a reproductively active male were likely to get their periods sooner. So the father's pheromones in some way kind of shielded them from the early onset of their periods. So I think
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's even more that we don't understand and that we're only starting to understand. And there could be so many factors that are playing into this. But I do think for sure that endocrine receptors probably have a lot to do with it. And who knows what else we'll find out in the next couple years.
Totally. Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. All that stuff is so interesting. I think I'm glad that you brought up that study because I remember a friend of mine telling me about that years ago, not in as much detail, but just being mind blown by that idea. Yeah. And I'm excited to jump back into that study because I have like so many questions about specifics of it. And I think it's also interesting too. I think this is something I've been doing more and more in my own kind of health detective work is also trying not to overlook the very basic like emotional components or trying to almost see things as put things back as emotional questions to myself. And not that they're always anyway, and this has come in part from, dabbling in a little bit, like German new medicine and some of those kinds of things, but where even just thinking about, if a girl is starting this process of sexual maturation early, like what could that mean for her, like what she's internalized about what she, and again, not to take this as like a prescription at all, but it just makes me curious, like, what is she internalizing from her environment about how she needs to show up in the world or like what she needs to do maybe to protect herself or to, be safe or like those kinds of things. Or if she's not starting her period till 17 or 18, I think all of that nutrition, like all of those components are so important to look into. And then also like, what are the emotional components of that too, potentially of like, what would make your body from an emotional kind of standpoint want to delay something like sexual maturation? Are you protecting yourself from something? Are you thinking you're protecting yourself for something? Yeah, just all those little things that, or even like sometimes when I've felt like shoulder pain or something, I'm like, okay, is there something I'm carrying, like feeling like I need to carry around that I maybe don't? And trying to think through some of those things first and then exploring other, like, oh, maybe I need to up my magnesium or like whatever it is, but just like not leaving off that side of, or of acne. Like, am I feeling, dirty or embarrassed about something that I am wanting to hide? Like all of those kinds of things that I just find to be interesting and productive to think about, as well as the kind of environmental explanations.
That's such a good point. And I think starting to create that awareness at a younger age is so important too. And I totally agree. Your expression of health, your fertility is an expression of what's going on inside you and how you're internalizing, again, your environment, and it's your response to things and how you're processing them. Right. I totally agree. And I think that's such an important thing to bring up. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's definitely a big piece of my work as well in terms of fertility. So I'm super glad you said that. So I have another question, and that's around birth control, because, the beginning of this conversation kind of included that as a consideration for managing your cycle. And it certainly has been a part of my own experience too. So I'm curious to know what the perception of birth control is by the mothers and possibly the daughters that you might be hearing in your program. I'm curious to know if it's being pushed as much as it used to be, I guess around the time, especially in my 20s or late teens, and how it's being received now. And it might be difficult to answer this question because by default, the mothers and daughters in your program are taking the more proactive sort of holistic
Right.
approach. But I'm just really curious to hear if you've heard anything from them.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I've had a number of women who've shared, their kind of health journey with me and why they're interested in offering something different to their daughters or for their daughters. And so birth control does come up a lot in the context of mom stories who are like, I want something different for my daughters because I realized as an older adult that birth control totally sabotaged my hormonal health for years. And maybe they were put on it as a teen or, when they went in with their mom for maybe even their acne or something like that. That was what was given to them. And now they're realizing, because of more awareness around what hormonal birth control does to the body, then they realized, oh my gosh, that didn't help me at all, in a holistic way, I guess. And so I would say that many of the moms that are coming to me already kind of have the lived experience of, I want my daughter to have something different. And so even just the refrain about, period pain is common but not normal. I mean, I probably heard that first maybe, I don't know, like 7 years ago or something. But I feel like even in those 7 years, just how often I see that come up in the social media health world is just, it's so much more widespread. And so even something like that, I think gets people thinking, okay, well, if it's not normal, then, maybe why would I go in and go this route if I should be, maybe figure out what my body's trying to say. So I do feel like there is more awareness that there are other steps you can take before birth control. And maybe, it's hard to know. It's also hard to know because I feel like my algorithm, I'm always aware when like my husband and I are like comparing reels or something, like, wow, your algorithm is so completely different than mine is. So I'm, even what I see on social media is just kind of my algorithm, but, tends to be more kind of a wariness about just kind of prescriptions and that kind of pharmaceutical model in general. And so, yeah, I do think there is much more hesitancy around it. Whereas like my mom's generation or even my generation, it was a lot more accepting of like, oh yeah, I guess I'm sure you know more about the menstrual cycle than I do. Like I'll take that pill and it's supposed to regulate my cycle. I think people maybe don't have that same trust in general anymore, but
yeah, or maybe they're not willing to just, I think more and more they're less satisfied with that answer.
Yeah.
And more curious as to why things are happening, which is, I love this shift.
Totally. Yeah.
I am so here for it. So I think that that's great. And, when I just want to clarify too for the audience, when I say birth control and when Megan says birth control, we're talking about hormonal and non-hormonal contraceptive methods, typically the IUDs,
Totally.
the birth control pills, those kinds of things, not necessarily condoms or like even fertility awareness, which is a method of birth control. So I just wanted to clarify that. And, this is not a judgment on anyone who has chosen to take birth control. I myself have taken it for several years in the past. So, just sharing experiences here and trying to share information. Okay. One question for you. Do you have any advice for mothers out there wanting to, but struggling to discuss the topic of puberty with their daughter?
I think a couple things that come to mind. One is taking some time to learn about your own body from sources that are talking about the female body in maybe like a more life-giving way or kind of empowering way. So that when you do have those conversations with your daughter, it can come out of more of a place of excitement or of comfortability with your own body, of maybe appreciation of the female body. Because if you've been told your whole life as a woman and as a mom that like being a woman is just kind of painful and like your best hope is to like stock up on heating pads and ibuprofen and stuff for your daughter before she becomes a woman, like if that's what female health is to you, then of course like there's going to be a kind of but that will be hard to have those conversations with her. I think more so than if you have felt really within your own body that your own cycle is something to be excited about. And it's not that I think everyone needs to love their periods. I don't think, and I even say that in my course, like talk about the 4 parts of the menstrual cycle as the 4 different seasons of nature. And like, it's okay if you have a favorite season of nature and like don't exactly love another one, but knowing that all play a role and that there are things you can do to kind of adapt in each season that can make your experience more enjoyable. Like, that's what I hope girls and moms get from the course. So I think kind of maybe moms approaching it in that way too. Like, can they get themselves to a place where they feel, comfortable in their own bodies, and knowing what's going on is going to be a lot less intimidating. And then another like practical note, just thinking about communication, I have one of my freebies is called Let's Connect. And in the guide, I talk about how to make a hidden journal with your daughter. Because I think there's also just thinking about the ways that we communicate. I think it's pretty common for many moms to feel like their daughter is kind of maybe retreat, or it's like you get into the cycle of how's your day? Good, fine. And you're not maybe getting as much detail, or I mean, every girl is different. So some are totally fine to share all the details of their life. But just thinking about other options for keeping those lines of communication open, especially around these topics that can feel kind of awkward. If your mom's making dinner and your little brother's sitting at the table, it's hard to walk in and be like, so breast buds, like you need some kind of special time sometimes to figure out how to start those conversations. And so I have this kind of hidden journal where you can make a journal together and kind of come up with some little communication codes where, maybe if you write a 1, that means that whatever you've written on the page, you want the other person to just know about, but you don't want to talk about it in person. Or maybe if you write a 2 in the corner of the page, that means like, can we find a time to talk about this? And you could also just write down how you want the other person to respond. But then you have kind of hiding spots where you have this journal, and then maybe I suggest like under one another's pillows in bed, where it's kind of hidden away, but it's this little, line of communication between moms and daughters of like, can we find a time to talk about this? Or I want to talk to you. That takes away a little bit of that face-to-face awkwardness that some people, not just teens or preteens, can find around any of these topics. And I've just heard a number of moms who have said, I thought my daughter was a really private person, and it turns out she just will, unload her heart on the page for me. And that like she wanted to share, she just didn't know how to do that face-to-face, or she didn't know when to do that. And so I think exploring other ways of having these conversations, and not that I think like your whole puberty conversation should be like over text or in a journal or something, but just realizing kind of the other things that can be put in place to allow for easier communication. If even a mom is wanting to talk about this stuff, but struggling because maybe it feels like your daughter never wants to talk about it, or like maybe the times you're bringing it up, she's closed off. And so kind of finding ways of communication that work for both of you can be helpful.
That's really beautiful. That's like really an intentional way to find more opportunities, like an intentional opportunity. And I think, again, having heard my friends with teenagers just about their kids just closing up, I feel like oftentimes it's just they don't know how to put into words what they're feeling. So I think that that's an amazing way to get your kids to open up to you and your daughter. And that's beautiful that you facilitate that in your program, because I mean, what better way to just not only talk about this stuff, but also just create a stronger relationship with your daughter.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh, I love this. Okay. I promise I only have 2 more questions.
Yeah, of course.
What's one thing that you would like to share with the audience that they can start doing today to unlock the innate wisdom of their body?
I think where I'm at right now, or something I've been thinking a lot about is, I've had a number of years where I've really dug into pieces that I think were missing in my concept of what health was and how to honor the body. So into nutrition and maybe nourishment more broadly and things like that. But I've started to realize that those things had kind of gotten out of place, or I was putting so much weight on how I thought I was supposed to be caring for my body, that in itself became a little bit toxic. And so for me now, I feel like trying to pay more attention to my thoughts and the ways that I'm thinking about, ironically, thinking about caring for my body. I'm trying to be more aware of that and realizing, how many nights I would lay in bed and think, oh, I didn't eat my beef liver this morning, or I didn't get enough, I'm sure I did not get enough grams of protein in today. Like all these, I could kind of start running through, I need to take my magnesium tomorrow. And it just became this list of all these ways that I was failing to care for my body in the way that I thought I was supposed to be caring for my body. And so starting to try to give thoughts more weight, and even, kind of changing the script a little bit, and of just being more thankful for my body, working through like, oh, wow, I'm so grateful for like this is really working so well in my body. I'm so grateful for my body. I'm so proud of my body that it allows me to do this, and that, this part of me felt really great today, or whatever it is. Just trying to add in the same way of like being a good, on the same team as your body, or being a good teammate with your body or something. It's like if we only ever were just spouting off all the ways that, we were failing, or it was failing, or whatever, it becomes a kind of toxic relationship. And so even though I thought I was helping by trying to layer all these things I needed to do or things I needed to eat, I was creating this real just cycle of negativity for myself, for being like, oh, I bet tomorrow I'm going to be so hungry because I didn't give my body enough. Like I was starting to like create little probably self-fulfilling prophecies for my body of like, because I thought I'd learned the science behind it. And so now I was just waiting for the fatigue to kick in, because I'm sure I had burned through my, like all this kind of stuff, like my adrenal cocktail I didn't have. And so now my adrenal got all this stuff. And so kind of more so speaking the resilience of my body kind of over myself, and the goodness of my body, and, the things that I am proud of to have done to support my body that day, and realizing that that was a missing piece for me has been big. And I think that just allows some of that repair to happen, and allows me, I hope, to be more open to the messages my body is sending me. So yeah, that's probably what I would say.
I think that's so important. And, for anyone to kind of incorporate and really take notice, especially if you're, trying to conceive and also having possibly struggles, the way that you can start to talk to yourself can be really inhibitory and just energetically like not a good place. And I feel like with the obsession that is wellness and health, it can be really easy to fall into that stuff, especially if you're constantly scrolling on social media and seeing things that you should be doing and should be buying. And like,
oh my gosh, I know.
It can get really out of control. And just being able to have that awareness and almost trust in your body that, okay, you missed a couple grams of protein, but you're going to be fine. And,
right.
And you're grateful you got those grams of protein that you did get in. And you're grateful that you were able to, go do this amazing walk, 15-minute walk between your, meetings, and you got to spend time with your partner. Like it's so much more than just, the things you need to do every day. And I think that is beautiful. And I'm so glad you brought light to that, because I think it's, especially in this sort of wellness space, it's so easy to get caught up in the details like that. So I commend you for that.
I'm working on it, but it feels nice to be in that
It's always a work
stage.
in progress. Mm-hmm. Everything is. So, okay. Well, Megan, it's been a pleasure having you. My last question is, how can people find you?
Yeah, I've had so much fun. So there's a few different places. At my website, bodytalkbasics.com, is where I have a lot more information about my course. I break down what I cover in each section, and how you can access the course, and some of my freebies are there as well. And then kind of the main place where I live, is what it feels like, is on Instagram, where I have a really wonderful community of moms, but also just of women who love talking about their bodies. And I started it thinking it would be this place where I could educate people and blah, blah, blah. And it's really more so turned into a really fun, like, ladies' night all the time, is what it feels like, of just women, asking questions. And I do a lot of polls and kind of question box responses and things like that, and about all kinds of body things, but also like, what's your most embarrassing email address, as a younger person, like those kinds of things, where we can just kind of like laugh with each other and at ourselves. And so it's a really fun, I try to keep it a very fun place because who needs more like negativity in their life? So would love to have people join me over there.
Well, amazing. I hope everyone goes and checks Megan's stuff out. Go follow her on Instagram. And if you have a daughter who is, or niece, or,
granddaughter, if a grandma's take it with their grandchild, or granddaughter.
Anyone that you're caring for that's, kind of close to or going through puberty, this is such an amazing resource. I've taken it myself. So I hope that you find as much joy taking it as clearly as Megan has had creating it. All right. Well, thanks so much, Megan. We will talk soon. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Innate Wisdom Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review and share the podcast with someone who you think might benefit. If you're new here, we can't recommend enough that you take advantage of my free resources, like the Get Pregnant Yesterday checklist, Cycle Literacy Guide, Prenatal Primer, and Sperm Booster Manual. And if you're trying to conceive now or in the near future, I invite you to join my pregnancy prep e-course, Conscious Conception. Make sure to follow me on Instagram too, at innate_fertility, and consider joining my newsletter to receive exclusive content related to fertility and so much more. A friendly reminder, the content shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be a substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.